everyone is joining us from today, but from where I am, I'm joining all of you today from Montreal. So for us, it's already very dark and it's the good afternoon. So thank you for joining us today for the AAAL Graduate Student Committee's second webinar, Teaching While Grad Schooling, What, Why, and How. So my name is John. I'm a PhD candidate at McGill University, and I'm a proud member of AAAL GSC's Event Planning Subcommittee, and I will be your moderator today. But my team is joining me here today to help support with everything from the chat and whatnot. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and distributed to GSC members via our YouTube channel. Before starting today's event, I'd like to already let you know of our upcoming events. Particularly, we are planning to have 2 special interest panels during the AAAL 2023 conference, which will be in Portland, Oregon. So please stay tuned for our updates by following our social media accounts. So we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And I'm pretty sure we're on LinkedIn as well. So do try and follow us there. So without much further ado, I will be introducing you all to our 3 amazing speakers for today. Starting with, whoops, got ahead of myself there. Starting with Rhonda Chung. So Rhonda Chung is a doctoral candidate in education at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. She is a Fonds de Recherche du Québec, Société et Culture Scholar, and recipient of Concordia's 2022 Scholarship for Doctoral Students in Education from the Ministry of Higher Education. She has also served for 2 years as graduate representative in her Department of Education's EDI committee, where she has actively advocated for inclusive pedagogical practices. For over 10 years, she has taught both English and French as second languages to a wide range of students and has lectured in McGill and Concordia University's Bachelor of Education TESOL programs. Her research focuses on creating inclusive and anti-colonial pedagogies in language learning and in teacher training programs through multimodal, plurilingual, and land-sensitive methodologies. So let's all give Rhonda a warm welcome. Our next speaker is Dr. Cristina Sánchez-Martín. Dr. Cristina is an assistant professor of English at the University of Washington, Seattle, and her transdisciplinary work involves thinking about language, literacy, and identities through expansive orientations to create more equitable dynamics in and outside of academic spaces. Her work appears in TESOL Quarterly, Journal of Multilingual Education Research, Computers and Composition, Journal of Second Language Writing, and several edited collections. Please give Dr. Cristina a warm welcome as well. And last but not least, we have Megan Heise. Megan Heise is a PhD candidate in composition and applied linguistics at Indiana University of Pennsylvania and holds an MFA in creative writing and poetics from Naropa University. Her dissertation, winner of TURF's Russell N. Campbell Award, investigates how resettled refugee teens perceive and enact transmodal approaches in a zine workshop, with the ultimate goal of centering refugee learners' wants, needs, and strengths in pedagogy, policy, and practice. She teaches first-year writing at Carnegie Mellon University with a custom course design titled Crossing Borders, Forced Migration and Transnationalism in the 21st Century, highlighting work by BIPOC, refugee, and immigrant writers, as well as a language and identity course centered on translingualism for multilingual students. She recently served as co-editor for Writing Spaces, Volume 4, and her scholarship can be found in Inspiring Pedagogical Connections and is forthcoming in Professionalizing Multimodal Composition and Critical Pedagogy in the Language and Writing Classroom. So let's all give Megan a warm welcome as well, and welcome to all of our 3 speakers. I will just walk you through today's webinar. So our webinar consists of 3 parts. First, each speaker will share via 20-minute presentations their insights about their experiences and knowledge relating to the webinar's theme, which is teaching while doing grad school. This will take around an hour for the entirety of the panel. Afterwards, we will have the remainder of the time to hold a question and answer session with you all who are attending and joining us today, as well as with our panel, which will start roughly around 6:35, 6:40 p.m. EST, because I'm in EST. During the Q&A session, the speakers will respond to questions voiced by the audience. So you can unmute yourself only at this time, please, as well as those questions left in the chat and those left in the registration form. And just a reminder, please don't forget to turn off your video, mute your microphone, and use the chat box for questions or comments during the presentations. Let's get started with our presentations. We'll go by the order in our posters. So why don't you get us started, Rhonda? And please let us know if you would like us to share the screen for you, or if you would like to share from your end.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm just going to cut my video while I talk. And if everyone can let me know if they see my screen. Great, thanks so much. So thank you so much, Graduate Student Association of the AAAL, for inviting me here. I can see in the chat that lots of people actually already are teaching. So the first few slides I have may not be applicable to you because I wasn't sure who was going to be coming here today. So once again, my name is Rhonda Chung, and it's customary in a lot of presentations here in Canada that we give a territorial acknowledgement, but I'd like to flip the narrative a little bit and give a self-location. So I'm located on what is now called Montreal, but is traditionally called Tiohtià:ke by the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation and also Munyang by the Anishinaabe Nation. And this area has served as a meeting place for many people of different nations. So Tiohtià:ke is an island. It's this boot-shaped land formation in the middle here, and those waters allow people to come here from many different places. And I think that says a lot about what this place is traditionally supposed to be about. And it's also something that's been informing my, my scholarship as time goes on. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about before the teaching, so I have before teaching, is to strategize. So what I did was I strategized my TA-ships. I wanted to know to boost my chances of obtaining a lectureship and whenever possible to apply for the lecture job the following semester. So for example, if you want to teach phonology, then you would go ahead and apply for a TA-ship in phonology, and hopefully with that experience, you can then teach it the following year. It gives you an idea of how students engage with certain learning tasks, and it also provides you with an opportunity to imagine what you might do differently in that course. So for example, I did happen to TA for phonology, and I did happen to give phonology class the following semester. And so one of the things that students struggled with was a lot of the technical terms. So when I was giving it, I said to myself, well, I'm going to water some of those things down because students are coming in with sometimes just linguistics 101, which is really, really like a broad stroke course. Where they have to pick like basically all the five, the syntax, morphology, and all of that. So it's just not enough background to do a deep dive in phonology. Moving forward, you know, what do you want to know how to teach? So it's not necessarily, you know, maybe you have some experience with computer-based learning, but you want to learn more, or you want to expand your teaching range. Well, go ahead and be a TA for those things, because that will help you to hone your skills even deeper. So another thing is to look to expand your teaching range. So you might be a psycholinguist who doesn't have a lot of background with sociolinguistics. So go ahead and TA for that, or TA for an arts-based education class, something outside of your expertise, because that only expands your teaching range. So TA-ships often allow for paid hours of skill set training, which our course is supposed to so TAs often give you paid hours of skill set training, and this supports you while you're teaching. You can ask the instructor if you can attend these skill set training courses, and they should be paid. So some of the things that happened, especially during COVID, was I wanted to learn more about maximizing Zoom, inclusive evaluations using Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. I also looked for workshops that targeted certain aspects of my own professional development, like preparing an academic CV for your course. So or sorry, for your overall professional development. So these are some of the things that I did before starting to teach. When it comes to actually applying for your lecturer position, I would highly suggest bolding keywords that align with the job descriptions to draw the reader's attention to it. So say exactly what it is and bold it so it's not just a wall of text. Use active language for any current teaching related activities. So you are evaluating, you are providing feedback or responding to student inquiries. And even for people, so I've, had people talk to me about, I don't have any background in teaching whatsoever. And I always say to never discount the customer relations skill that you had in maybe a customer service job, because and to work well in a high-paced environment, and all of those skill sets are required when you're teaching and you're preparing your slides, but you're also replying to emails and you're also going to like departmental meetings. All of those things come into to play. And also, if you do have limited teaching experience, to underline things like any project leadership you have, any tutoring, and anything of that nature where you are the lead or the project manager of that particular subject. So in terms of lecturing, these might seem like very basic administrative things, but they really make a big difference. Getting your faculty ID card allows you to access the library and some of those resources like Force Reserves. And I actually recently had a problem with that. And I was so lucky I had my faculty ID card because it doesn't work the same as your student ID, depending on the university that you're. First time I didn't realize that. I'm like, oh, what do I have to do? So as soon as you know, find out about ordering textbooks, because it can take oftentimes up to 6 weeks. And so that's something that you want to get out of the way. Also, I highly recommend before you walk into the classroom to physically visit it, see if your apparatuses work. So is your phone going to work there? Is your laptop going to work there? Are you able to log into the system? All things I experienced, so I don't want that for you. So that's just sort of like the bare bones of what I did sort of before the actual lecturing. And also to attend any orientation sessions offered. This is where you can find out things like the stated values of the university. Do they have ED-ID principles or equity, diversity, inclusivity, and decolonial principles? These are important things that you'll need to know when you put these into your course syllabus and you're able to say like what this course will accomplish, what it can do. So in terms of actually lecturing and preparing your syllabus, oftentimes the university will supply you with previous course syllabi. But I also would recommend asking colleagues for suggestions for up-to-date articles from Indigenous and racialized scholars, because as we know, they are cited in our field, and these things are very important to be discussing if we're to be critical scholars for the future. I also would recommend looking for any EDI or decolonization statement from the university, and I would link it and also quote it in your syllabus, especially if you are considering having a critical course. Moving forward. So for me, I lecture from my positionality, and it's taken me quite a few years for me to feel comfortable doing that, because I would say that the university hasn't been an open place. I mean, they say they want to be critical, but that hasn't always been my experience. And so if we consider that the syllabus is a contract with your students, so if you're going to provide a decolonial or anti-colonial perspective, be transparent about that so that they know what's happening, while it's happening. And, we are educators of pre-service and in-service language practitioners, but mostly of colonial languages like English, French, and Spanish. And I agree with Donaldo Macedo when he said that these languages cannot be decolonized because they are the colonizer. So these are some things that we have to think about when we use these terms in our course syllabus. So I advocate for what Kakali Bhattacharya calls a decolonial syllabus. And so this is a holistic endeavor that not only involves an intellectual engagement with material, but also emotional, spiritual, and physical. And it confronts both the local and the global responsibilities of education, because colonialism works across borders. So we also have to talk about colonialism across borders. So even though Canada and the United States might be different, we do have quite a bit in common as two countries that are a descendant of a colonial process in England. And I also offer students reading things or even teachers ahead of time to read Indigenous authorship who've given us such a wealth of information to do this work and to challenge the cognitive imperialism that really is at the center of most of Western epistemologies. So if you're going to teach, once again, from an anti-racist, anti-bias, or anti-colonial stance, be prepared for resistance. That is going to happen, but you can sort of mitigate that that resistance using things like statements of teacher code of conduct or statements in support of EDI or decolonization. And I guess I would say that if the university that you're teaching at doesn't have those statements, then maybe you want to be strategic about how you provide these issues in your classroom, because you may not be supported. So always expect resistance, so have a backup plan. So as you will encounter resistance. So pass this slide. So in Canada, one of the ways that I mitigate that is to call direction or call attention to our Truth and Reconciliation commitment and our calls to action, where we specifically say that the role of education is provide funding to post-secondary institutions to educate teachers on how to integrate, for example, Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods in the classroom. So those are some of the ways that I use my positionality and in the classroom, and that I advocate for these the anti-bias and these anti-racist issues in the classroom. So to get to the heart of what we were talking about in general, so how do you balance teaching in grad school? So there's a few things. I'm finished my courses, so that allows me to teach while either doing a reading course or tutorial to avoid the pressures of the course-based deadlines. So that was a choice of mine, but I'm also, I teach languages, I lecture, but I'm also a mother. So for me, time is very precious. I have to be very strategic about how I use it. I also am very, very tied to my schedule. So I really carve out time, and I also carve out time. So for marking, for lecture slides, and I do that. And I also have to schedule time for research, because you don't want your research to sort of fall to the wayside. And one of the things that has been very helpful for me as I teach and do research is the way that the two sort of talk to each other. So the way that I'm researching influences how I teach, but the way that I teach is influencing how I'm researching. So if I'm dealing with students who are in their first year with very little information about Indigenous issues or anti-racism, then that will influence how I write, because I'm always thinking about who this is reaching and how this is going to make an impact. And then so when things get super stressful, I like to remind myself of a few things. Whatever you're going through, it's only temporary. You should tell yourself you get to do this. Like 5 years ago, you weren't doing this. You get to do this now. You are in your PhD or you are in your master's, and you get to do that. And to never forget that that's really important and the reason why you're there. Disconnect from social media from time to time. I find that sometimes it's great. I miss people and I connect with them. Other times it's really draining. So I tell myself, I sign out of it. I'm like, not today. That's not happening today. And also to connect physically with friends whenever possible. That has been proven to show a drastic change in your emotions and your positive sense of well-being. Take walks in nature. That is also linked to lowering stress and to give you a sense of calm. I eat well, drink water. I'm on my 4th glass today. No, my 5th glass today. So I'm very proud of myself. That's all that stuff is very important. And one of the techniques that I also use is a Pomodoro technique. So if you're struggling with focusing on tasks, or if you're struggling with finishing something are like, God, am I ever gonna, finish it? The Pomodoro technique is really great because it allows you to chip, and then you give yourself 5 minutes to stretch and walk around, and definitely stretch. I'm dealing with issues of like being at a computer right now physically, and I don't want that for you. So learn from my terrible mistakes to get up and stretch and do those things. I also use white noise and brown noise to help me to focus as well. So I think I've said as much as I can about this issue. I thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rhonda. That was a lot of great tips there that I wish I knew before I started teaching. So thank you so much for sharing. Now, yes, we can have Dr. Cristina. Would you like to share your screen, or would you like for us to share it for you?
But I should unmute myself first and foremost. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, Jeon, and the entire GSC team. You're doing wonderful work, so I appreciate that. And thank you, Rhonda, as well, for starting off with all of those amazing details and tips. I'm really interested in the Pomodoro technique. I love it. I would also like to start with a land acknowledgement to situate myself and the work that I'm doing. Although, like Rhonda said, this type of work should be ongoing, and as much as you can, I want to encourage you to continue learning about the places where you're at and the stories and the histories behind those spaces. So I'd like to say that I'm a grateful but uninvited visitor to the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, past and present, including the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations and the Duwamish peoples in the Pacific Northwest. I acknowledge the land occupied by the University of Washington, Seattle, and the land on which I live, learn, and practice as Coast Salish land. I recognize this land acknowledgement to be only one small act in an ongoing process of understanding and opposing the systematic oppression and historic and contemporary erasure of indigeneity and indigenous peoples. So if you'd like to know more about this, there's a wonderful resource called Native Land. I'm sure that many of you have used it, so that you can learn a little bit more about the spaces where you're in and all the histories behind it. I would also like to begin with a memory about grad school, because oftentimes I think about this and what took me to where I am today. So I came from Spain to Illinois State University, where I got my PhD in English studies. And the relationships that I was able to form since the beginning really shaped my trajectory. And so this memory was the very beginning of that trajectory. I walked into the coffee house in Uptown Normal, Illinois, with my friend Anna, who was a second-year PhD student in the literature track. We were going to get coffee and get some grading done. I was teaching Spanish 112 at that time, and she was teaching first-year writing. We ran into one of our mentors, Dr. Angela Haas. Anna introduced me to Angela, who was going to be my professor next year and who ended up being a fierce and supportive longtime mentor for both of us. So I wanted to start with that because that really shaped my trajectory. And I want you to, as I continue talking about what it was like for me to be in grad school and to teach and learn at the same time, I want you to think about who are the people who are making an impact on your career. So in this presentation, I will draw from my experiences as a graduate student and teacher, and now as faculty interested in creating spaces for teachers and students to learn holistically and meaningfully. And I will also draw from the stories and experiences of others from which I've learned and continue learning throughout the years. And I'm going to invite you to reflect on your own experiences as well, your needs, and how to cultivate spaces for growth. So my experiences in grad school, like I said, I got a PhD in English studies with a concentration in applied linguistics and composition studies at Illinois State University. I had 2 years of coursework, 1 year to complete my exams and 2 years to complete my dissertation, which was called Teaching Writing Through Transformation, Linguistically Diverse Writing Teachers, Enactments of Linguistic Diversity, with my mentors, Lisa Saloni, Joyce Walker, and Aaron Smith. who I wanted to name because they were wonderful. During that time, I was teaching composition courses in the writing program as a TA. I also taught courses at the English Language Institute, and I worked with students who are called ESL students, or multilingual students, and also monolingual students from the US. And I also work as professional development coordinator in the writing program. And all of these experiences really shaped my work and how I was able to conduct research and so on. So in fact, being part of the writing program allowed me to connect with other multilingual teachers in the writing program and conduct research with them for my dissertation. And this was one of the most meaningful pieces of data that I collected for my dissertation, and it came from a multilingual student from France who was reflecting on what it meant to be a graduate student and a teacher at that time. And she created this comic, and she called it the Grad dilemma. And on the first page, you can see that at the center, there's this note where it says, I am an imposter. There's so many things that I don't know. There's this little piece of paper with somebody who looks like Jon Snow, and it says he knows nothing. Witnesses claim the suspect. I know that I know nothing, and then there's a drawing of the painting The Scream, and the person has written down, do they know? Do people know that I feel like an imposter, right? And there's also a figure of an ancient rhetorician, it seems, right? A cigarette and so on. Then on the bottom of the page, she starts talking about how one day she appeared, and her name was Academia. And at first, she didn't understand what she wanted from the student, but she was intrigued, right? And so Academia, this non-traditional academia, asked the student to follow her. And so she slammed the door and she followed her. On the second page, you can see that the student is following Academia, and she says, I walk briskly, eyes on the prize. And so she's trying to chase Academia, but I thought that she was escaping me until I understood. And all of a sudden we see this huge realization moment. And that's when the student realizes these things that she says on the bottom of the page. When she's with this new version of Academia, she says, I can teach even though I'm still learning. I'm a scholar in my own right. I have a voice and it matters to others. I can do research on anything I love. Curiosity is my best friend. Mistakes are valuable too, and people are here to help. And on the bottom, you see these feelings of fear, anxiety, self-doubt, and so on. And the student is standing on that together with the new version of Academia, right? And so this was really important. This was a really important piece of data for my dissertation because it spoke about how powerful language paradigms and writing paradigms can be for how we think about our own work in academia, right? And so being part of a writing program and being part of a cohort of writing teachers and others who understood academia in these ways was really meaningful for all of us. So some of the things that I found in that particular research project and other ones that I've done, that I did later on, was that this time is a very contradictory experience, right? It is both inspiring and dehumanizing. People experience imposter syndrome, but also they're recognized for their work. They develop innovative ideas, but at the same time, they are operating in a traditional and oppressive system. They're being teachers and students at the same time. It's collective, but it's lonely. It can be familiar, but it can also be strange at the same time. And there might be other contradictions. And I'm going to invite you to put some, if you have experienced them, in the chat if you'd like. But that's what it's like to be in grad school, right? And some other central ideas about these experiences in grad school are that graduate students and teachers navigate complex academic spaces that are unequal, that socialization is central to understanding their experiences and how they learn to navigate all of those requirements, the hidden curriculum, where to get resources from, and so on. that mentoring and community support are essential in their socialization processes and maintaining well-being, and that traditionally academia has been built around hierarchies and competitive ideas that have left aside minoritized communities. But we can also carve out space and relationships that push back and help us to appreciate our growth collectively. And that's why when I started, I thought about this memory, because those particular relationships really helped me to understand and to make sense of my experiences during grad school, especially when it was together with other women and racialized people. So what I've learned is that it's really important to find your peeps, as one of my mentors said, for community building and collective knowledge making. So you might want to think about different kinds of mentors, right? Not everybody's going to be able to help you with the same things. So it's important to have a wide network of people who you can just talk to about all the questions that you're going through. And these include fellow graduate students, dissertation chairs, or other advisors, professors and scholars in and outside of your department and institution, and your professional networks. But also teacher scholars who inspire you and who you read and who you go talk to after conferences and things like that. And individuals and communities outside of academia. I always think about my grandma all the time, and that's really helpful. So it's important to recognize that mentoring is work and should be recognized as such. So please be grateful to your mentors and show your appreciation to them. And one of the scholars who I've read recently talks about this idea of academic aunties, and her name is Michelle M. Jacob. She's an enrolled member of the Yakama Nation and professor of Indigenous Studies and director of the Teacher Education Program in the English Department at the University of Oregon. And she talks about this figure of the academic auntie, who for her talk about work projects and their families. They tell stories about back home. They share ideas with generosity and always keep an eye towards helping connect you to what will help you to heal, to be your best. Against all odds, these women exist in all halls of academic, a place that is typically hostile to everything academic aunties bring: love, kindness, encouragement, patience, hope. So aunties, when needed, keep those magical gifts tucked away. In accepted aunties' help, you become responsible for helping others in the future. So I want to emphasize as well this idea of reciprocity, right? So altogether, like I said before, experiences in grad school are very contradictory, right? But if we take care of ourselves and one another, we can maintain a positive and hopeful perspectives in spite of challenging and hurtful situations. So I would like to ask these questions for you to reflect on. What and who inspires you to be a teacher and a scholar? When and where do you do your best work? What brings you joy outside of academia? And how do you take care of yourself and others in your communities? And some tips that a colleague and I have written about in a recent book chapter that we find helpful for ourselves are that it's essential that you find your peeps, as our mentor said, and nurture those relationships. Be critical of your environments and the larger institutions that you're in. Negotiate your participation in different academic and non-academic communities, making sure that you have the support of academic aunties to approach situations strategically and find opportunities for self and collective care while expressing gratitude and love. And this goes back to what Rhonda was saying earlier about how you might experience resistance, and it's very likely that it will happen, especially if you choose to engage in critical pedagogy and critical scholarship, right? So having this support is essential. And lastly, conceptualize the types of spaces and relationships that enable your growth and nurture them with anti-love. So to end, a few more questions. Since I started with a memory, I want you to think about your memories. So what are some memories that you have about your journey throughout your graduate education? What do those memories and or experiences reflect about you and how you need to carve out space to foster your well-being and growth? What strategies for self and collective care work for you? considering your lived experiences, and can you pass on your knowledge to others around you, and in what ways? If you'd like to know more about the comic that I shared or any of the other ideas, these are some of the pieces that I have referred in this presentation, and that is it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Sánchez-Martín. And just a reminder to everyone, please feel free to drop any comments, thoughts, questions that you might have for our panelists in the chat during this time. My colleague Sophia will make sure to collect all of your questions, and we'll make sure that they'll be asked later during the Q&A. But for now, let's move on to our final speaker for the night. Megan, please take it away.
Almost started going full speed without unmuting myself. That seems to be a trend. Okay, so let me get this sharing. I do have a QR code on the first slide that has access to my access copies and presentation slides. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I'll drop a link in the chat as well. Okay. Hi, so I'm Megan Heise, and I'm going to talk about precarity, pedagogy, and possibility today. That's what I was thinking of when I thought of teaching while grad schooling. So just to sort of cover what I'll cover, I wanted to just start with a brief introduction on me, my background in teaching and research, and then really get into talking about the notion of precarity and the reality of labor conditions for graduate student instructors. Then moving on to pedagogy, or working within constraints to mesh our research and teaching. And finally, envisioning possibilities or ways forward, especially for and as grad student instructors. So again, just an introduction to my research and teaching. I'm Megan, I use she, her pronouns. I'm a PhD candidate in composition and applied linguistics at IUP. And my research and teaching focus on refugee literacies, transmodality, and zines, podcasts, and other multimodal forms. So I just have some images here on the bottom of a zine that I made as part of my dissertation study. The zine's called Change Starts at Home. And there's an arrow just pointing to one of my course designs, Crossing Borders, Forced Migration, and Transnationalism in the 21st Century. So just some background on some of these things that I study. Within refugee literacies, there's quite a few sort of problems that are addressed in the field as well as in my own work. And some of these are that neocolonial norms value only written English literacy. Formal education often takes a deficit view, particularly of refugee learners' different languages, for example. And refugees' own perspectives are largely ignored. So this is a core question for me from Burrell and Hershelman, which reads, what tools are available to center the experiences of refugees themselves within public imaginations? And what are the progressive and political possibilities of doing so? So one of my responses is this notion of transmodality or transmodalities, or just transmodal framework. Different folks conceptualize it in different ways, but regardless, this really is a framework where languages and modalities meet and mesh and are fluid, dynamic, integrated, and socially situated. So this quote's from Margaret Hawkins, who's kind of big in transmodalities research. So Hawkins says that transmodalities references transcendence and transgression, where inequitable relations of power can be dismantled and reconfigured, affording equal access, value, and representation to all participants in transmodal interactions. So that's certainly the hope of a transmodal framework. And one of the ways that I see as enacting a transmodal framework are zines. So zines are just small handmade booklets. I have another zine example here. It's a cover of a zine by one of my participants who wrote zine twice on it and has a beautiful little red flower. And in this work, I've found that zines center refugees' perspectives as authors or creators, and also build upon refugees' rich linguistic and modal resources. So the study that I'm doing itself is transmodal zine making with resettled refugee youth. I have a picture of my dissertation study design with kind of nesting circles. The outermost circle is my transmodal framework that I just talked about. Within that is a CBR or community-based research and PAR or participatory action research stance. Really low on room in these circles, so I abbreviated everything. Within that is my arts-based research methodology or ABR. And then finally, I have my actual methods and data sources. There are 4 field notes, zine artifacts, surveys, and arts-based interviews. And all of this is seeking to answer my overarching question of how do resettled refugee youth perceive and enact transmodal practices in a zine making workshop? Looking at that, I have sort of 3 different sub areas. So compositional choices like what do they choose, what topics do they choose to compose about, and in what languages and modalities. And also outcome perceptions, how are participants perceiving the benefits and challenges of a transmodal approach, and asset identification, what are they identifying as pre-existing skills and resources that they are drawing upon when making these zines. So my research informs my teaching. So I have just 2 different course designs here. Again, the one from Crossing Borders, Forced Migration and Transnationalism in the 21st Century. And there's a picture of a social network visualization. There's sort of like a central big node and lines kind of swirling out in multiple colors to other nodes. And then I have another class that I teach language and identity, which is for English 100. And this is a picture of human language families. It's a map with different colored splotches around the map to show different language families. So just from the kind of titles alone, I think it might be sort of clear how I bring my research into my teaching. So before I talk more about that and those possibilities, though, I wanted to really address precarity and graduate student instructors are material realities. So graduate student instructors, we are often graduate teaching assistants, which I'm going to just call GTAs moving forward, or contingent faculty. So for example, I myself am contingent faculty. I teach at a different institution. I teach at Carnegie Mellon as an adjunct, whereas I'm getting my degree from IUP. So I'm not a teaching assistant, I'm contingent faculty. But regardless of kind of which one of these 2 primary kind of classifications we might fall into, I'm kind of arguing that grad student instructors can be considered part of the precariat. And this is a class of workers, quote, encompassing at least 1/4 of the world's workers who lack a secure work-based identity and investment in employment, have a limited range of rights, and have experienced de-skilling, alienation, and downward economic mobility, end quote. And that's from Birdsell Bauer. So especially for GTAs and contingent faculty, we are very vulnerable to overwork and exploitation. I don't think I'm really saying anything new to anyone who's currently teaching here. So one example from Rao et al. Is that GTAs, quote, often work on an hourly paid basis where the contact hours of teaching are rewarded, but preparation, marking or grading, and pastoral care of students are not often remunerated like their academic peers. So that's just a tricky one where a lot of contracts for GTAs or for contingent faculty are often based on contact hours and all of the preparation, especially for those of us in grad school. If it's our first time teaching, that prep work is much more than it is once you sort of start teaching the same course, a couple of times. So that's just something to sort of bear in mind as well. And there's a lot of layers of complexity to, our experiences as GTAs, because GTAs can be multiply marginalized based on their diverse identities. And, for example, I don't have it up on the slides here, but there's quite a bit of research into invisible labor in academia, and findings that disproportionately these emotional and invisible labors that are crucial to student success are done by women, people of color, and especially women of color. Another sort of issue that I'm kind of homing in on here is challenges that international GTAs can face. So Banville et al. Are talking about how GTAs may not enjoy the fundamental right of expression or the freedom to leave a program, as that could lead to deportation. Zhang also writes about how GTAs face unique vulnerabilities tied to travel, citizenship, and work restrictions. So this is definitely a complex one, I think made even more complex through the COVID-19 pandemic. Zhang talks more about that if you want to read their paper for more about that sort of experience. But this is one of those things that for me as a US citizen, I mentioned earlier, I'm an adjunct at Carnegie Mellon. I was able to go to a different institution to be an adjunct because I'm not here on a visa, I'm a US citizen. Whereas just seeing some of my peers going through similar things at my school when they, due to austerity measures, cut our, TA positions, they had to really go through a lot to find other work because they had to work only on our main campus. And so I don't want to speak for them or on behalf of them, but just as a friend and peer, that's something I noticed and definitely acknowledge as a very, real challenge. So I have kind of by the numbers here, just to sort of illustrate this is not just an IUP thing. So 33% of GTAs or graduate teaching assistants are international students. Thinking back to the precariat that I mentioned, people working in precarious situations, 1/4 of the labor force, 55% of the precariat are people of color. So seeing a disproportionate impact of that on people of color. And then 75% of faculty are non-tenure track, which I was surprised by. So only 25% of faculty are tenured or on the tenure track. Everyone else is not. So that's a lot of people who are teaching who are in these precarious situations. And I wanted to include this quote from Megan McCool as well. So as a graduate student, I found myself restricted by the ways I couldn't seem to shake the strategic hold I felt from my academic institution. And McCool's piece is specifically about community engaged research, which is, the sort of research that I do as well. And some of the things that they talk about are just scheduling, the academic calendar versus a nonprofit organization's calendar. Oh, I'm on break this week. Well, the organization's not on break that week. What do you do? As well as in community research, there's so much of a need for considerations of longevity, sustainability, and reciprocity. And so it's hard to do that as a grad student. It's hard to commit to truly long-term sustainable work as a grad student because we don't know where we're going to be after graduation for many of us. We don't know if we'll be in the same city as our graduate program was in. Because of all these precarious factors, we have such a need to move up or out of this ladder that we often have to just take the job that comes. And so there can be challenges in that way as well. But I do see some possibilities for meshing research and teaching and pedagogy that I wanted to talk about more. And kind of from a problem solution framework, some problems that I personally have dealt with is that, in my research, young refugees' voices are not heard. And this is just a picture of me with some resettled refugee teens that I have volunteered with at an organization locally. And then a problem in my teaching is that I'm constricted by institutional norms. And this is just a headshot of me from Carnegie Mellon with bright green hair. So I hesitate to commit to solutions, even though that's what I have on the slide, but maybe some ways to take advantage of avenues to exercise pedagogical agency. And again, here's my one course design. is really to, just look for the like footholds, I guess, and take advantage of them where you can. So for example, in my context, in my program, I can't choose major assignments, but I can choose the texts assigned for them. So for example, if, on the last slide, I'm talking about how, refugee youth voices aren't heard, I can assign digital magazines or podcasts or even zines that are, by refugee youth in my class for these major assignments. And so in that way, I can bring my values and my research into my teaching. I can't set learning outcomes, but I can choose my course theme, as I've talked about. Another one that frustrates me a lot is that I am explicitly not allowed, not just me, but everyone in the program, we're explicitly not allowed to use ungrading or contract grading approaches. But I can, for example, offer flexibility on deadlines. And I can't change university policies, but I can make my own exceptions on a case-by-case basis, again, with deadlines, absences, things like this. So in my courses, what I try to do is to center refugee and immigrant voices. So assigned texts are often by those with refugee experiences rather than simply about them. I also try to model these core values. So I assign texts that are model or mentor texts that show how authors are using a translingual or transmodal approach. So assigning texts that embody translanguaging approaches while I'm talking about translanguaging or translingualism, for example. Also, really trying to uphold linguistic justice. So my grading stance encourages transmodal practice and embraces linguistic differences. And I also encourage engagement. So students learn how to use their writing skills for public change in the community. One of the things that I do is have a social change panel, public writing for social change panel with people from the community, both locally and globally, who either have refugee experience or a lot of experience working with refugees, who use writing in different ways, whether it's like spoken word or grant writing or teaching writing, all these different things that they are using writing beyond academia. And that is always a really great module that we do, where students learn a lot about how they can take what they're learning in a first-year writing class and extend it beyond that context. So I wanted to kind of put this question out there, and feel free to, respond in the chat, or we can save it for the conversation after, whatever you want to do. But where is there room for your research and values in your teaching context? Where is there room for that without risking your job, given, all this precariousness we're talking about? So for example, can you choose your assignments? So you can pick assignments that align with your values and research interests. One example I always think of is my dissertation chair is a Wikipedia scholar. So in his classes, from grad classes to English 101s, he'll often assign a Wikipedia editing assignment that aligns with his research and values, for example. Can you choose your readings? So like I did, choosing texts in your area of research. Could you choose your grading approach? So especially for those of us in applied linguistics, how can we use our research to inform equitable linguistic grading practices? So this sort of leads me to the possibilities and how we can move forward as graduate student instructors within this complicated reality. So a couple of things that GTAs and contingent faculty might be able to do to sort of create change for us and by us is potentially unionization, joining or forming a graduate student or contingent faculty union. There's been a lot of unionization and efforts and strikes in the news lately. So that's definitely something that was on my mind as I was working on this. There's also subtle subversion, which is sort of what I kind of just talked about, like how can you weave your research and values into your teaching within the constraints of your institution? And then definitely seeing some echoes from the past presenters. So mentorship, so seeking out support of more senior faculty. And I totally agree with Dr. Cristina, express gratitude for them. And also communities. So just what we're doing right now, you know, connecting with other graduate students to commiserate, to share resources, to share experiences, and work together for change. So I wanted to end with this quote from Freire. So he says, precisely because we find ourselves subjected to countless limitations, there has never been a greater need to underscore educational practice with a sense of hope than there is today. Changing is difficult, but it is possible. So I will end there. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to the other presenters for their wonderful presentations. Thank you to the AAAL graduates, GSC, I forget what it stands for, I'm so sorry, for inviting me. Thanks everyone for being here. And I do have my institutional email and my personal email, because my institutional one will go away when I graduate. I also have my socials, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn here. And if you were following on the slides through the QR code or the link in the chat, I also have just my references. So that's what I got. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you to all of our panelists. That was super excellent. And it's crazy that that was an hour already. There was a lot of information, but now we have time to talk about what was said. So thank you again, Rhonda, Dr. Cristina, and Megan for sharing all of these tips and tricks with us today, and especially a lot of the reflection about our jobs precarity and what, you know, like the academic institutions sometimes do to us freely because we're precarious. So we'll now transition to our Q&A. As a reminder, you can raise your hand at this time if you wish to unmute your microphone and voice your question. You may also want to specify to which panelist you're addressing your question, if applicable. And for us to do it in an orderly manner, I will call on you and let you know when it's time to unmute your microphone, just in case multiple people would want to ask questions at the same time. And my colleague, Sophia, has been monitoring and collecting questions from the chat as well. So she will help us moderate questions from the chat and raise questions from the chat. And while we think of questions to voice, perhaps, Sophia, you might want to get us started with a question or two from the chat.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so our first question is from Alyssa Wolf, and she asks, and this is directed to everybody, so how do you balance feeling like you need to do a good job with teaching in order to adequately serve your students with other responsibilities as a grad student, and or those around you saying that teaching should be low priority compared to other program requirements like research? So I guess if any of the three speakers, if any of you all want to get started answering that, that would be great. Thanks so much.
I can go ahead. I fundamentally disagree with that. I know I've heard it, but I mean, I feel like you're there to serve the students, and you have the chance to influence or at least plant a seed in like the minds of multiple people, which we don't know where that will go. And I think that's a huge responsibility. And I don't see that as something that I would do lightly or as a low priority. So I've definitely heard that, but I also, the people who said that to me had a certain profile, so to speak. How can I be? And so it didn't surprise me that they said things like that. But, you know, I'm a first generation scholar. I don't have like my parents and grandparents who've been in and out of the ivory tower. So for me, this opportunity is very unique and important to me. And I think that I can do good work by sharing what I have with other students. So that's where I come from. And in terms of how I schedule or balance it with what I do, as I mentioned, I waited until I was finished with my courses, or I waited until I had tutorials, which made it much more flexible in terms of deadlines and when I would have to do things. Precisely because like the first time I taught, I knew I would be over over analyzing, over organizing. That's just the nature of when you do something the first time. So all of that, I had calculated that I'm like, okay, I'm going to need more time to do these things. So yeah, I would say that I don't agree that it's a low priority. I think it's an important priority. I think you have a responsibility to those people, and that work, that energy that you put in, you don't know where it would go. And I think as a teacher, you can't help but feel that's such a big responsibility. So for me, from my position, that's where I would come from.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, I had this conversation with a student today in class, and it's very interesting how they went about solving this particular contradiction. But when being said that, if somebody tells you that, I would think about, why is this person telling me that? Why is this person telling me to compromise my work ethic and how much I care for my students, or what I want to do, or how much I value teaching, right? What does it mean that they're saying these things? And perhaps something that you could do is to talk to one of your mentors and tell them about this and how you're feeling. And perhaps there's space, even in research one institutions like where I am now. This is a prevalent thing, right? It happens, like I hear it all the time. But there's programs and there's people who realize that that happens for a reason. And so to help graduate students and teachers, especially junior faculty and so on, not feeling that they have to compromise their work ethics with these issues, some people find ways to connect teaching and research much more directly through specific policies, through specific practices, and through things like giving awards and things like that, so that this idea that research matters more than teaching, or that they're completely separated when in fact they are not, so that idea dissipates and doesn't become as prevalent anymore. So you can start a conversation maybe by telling one of your mentors about how you're feeling by that particular question or that thing that somebody told you. And maybe that person can talk to the chair, maybe that person can talk to somebody else in your program, in your department, and they can find ways for teaching and research to be much more connected, and for these connection to be valued more explicitly through awards and through other kinds of things. Yeah, and so the student who asked me this today, she asked me, I have to write this paper for next Monday. What do I do? But my students are doing all of these wonderful things. Is it okay if I take a little bit of extra time and I prioritize my students' work and what I'm doing in class with them, and then I get back to you about my paper, 2 hours later? Totally fine, right? So it was interesting for me to see that she had identified this issue, she had identified a solution, and that she was willing to ask for it, and just go with it. So yeah, I hope that helps. I don't know.
I might just add in quickly, I won't reiterate the wonderful points that Rhonda and Dr. Cristina mentioned, but I wanted to hone in on the balance, the issue of balance as a grad student. I'm not sure I'm the best person to go off of, because I have a very chaotic way of managing my time, a very rigid yet chaotic way of managing my time. So I might be sending emails at 9 p.m. on a Saturday. I don't expect anyone to answer them, but sometimes I work best then, other times I don't, whatever. But one of the other things that I just keep thinking of is that teaching is absolutely my passion. I'm in it because I love it. And in a capitalist society, it is also the way that I pay my bills. Teaching is my only job right now. And so when it comes to prioritizing my dissertation, which is the vehicle to future imagined increased stability and prosperity, or the job that literally is paying my rent and my groceries this week, it is so hard to not just be dissertation fall away, because it's this imagined future thing. And I'm not saying that's the best way. I'm just being real that that's how I approach it, because I don't see my chair in this call. So I'm going to ask you IUP people to keep that to yourself. Not like he doesn't know, he's the one that gets it on time or not on time. But I just wanted to name that too, that sometimes it's I also feel I have to choose teaching because it's how I survive.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much for your great responses to that. I think this is really helpful to all of us as grad students. So we had another question in the chat from John, unless anybody has raised their hand, but so this question was to any/all of the speakers. Would you please share more about your thoughts/experiences about finding our peeps? So sometimes it's easier to find your research peeps because of having a cohort, joining a research lab, etc. But more specifically, how about finding teaching peeps? So Dr. Cristina, I know you kind of mentioned that term, but if anyone wants to talk about this, that would be greatly appreciated. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what works best for me is to identify who's not going to be part of my group of peeps. And that's a little strange to say, but it is true. I feel like you might want to identify who are other people around me who really value teaching in the way that I do, who are committed to social justice, equity-based teaching, whatever it is that you want to do, critical language pedagogy, whatever it is, right? Who are some others around me who do that kind of work, and reach out to them. And likewise, identify who might be some people who do the opposite, right? And whose work and ideas about teaching I might not be interested in, right? Because you might hear both things. You might hear people who seem really committed to teaching, and you might hear people who say horrible things about students all the time, right? So knowing who to talk to and noticing those things really matters. Like I found that for the people who I work with, that's something that they learn to do throughout time. And then I'm not sure what your institution does, but you might want to create a teaching community yourself and ask for support. Right now, I'm building a teaching community with another professor for K-12 students who are interested in equitable pedagogies. And we just started. We just sent a survey for people to share their interests and what they would benefit from. And we're collecting emails, and then we're just going to create a listserv and just share ideas, resources, and so on, and get together every once in a while. So that might be something helpful to do. And then make sure that you have some support in your institution and time and a space to meet maybe and things like that.
To piggyback off what Cristina was saying, I think it's great. I think people really reveal themselves to you. So they tell you things, and all you have to do is listen. All you have to do is listen, and you'll find out how they feel about things. And so I did join a research group. So my university is very psycholinguistic-y, very much the language is in the mind. There is an idea that's out there in the social world, but not so much. And I was glad to join a group at another university that allowed me to explore those ideas. And I definitely would not be the scholar that I am today. I don't think I would have had the courage to talk about the things that I did had I not had those people, had they not exposed me to those readings and those ways of thinking and challenged me. You know, Rhonda, are you sure you want to think about it that way? Have you thought about this? And they were people that I trusted. I did mention, or as was mentioned, I was part of an EDI committee, which was a very interesting experience. I will no longer be doing that ever. And the reason why is because even in those committees where people are supposed to be committed to concepts of equity, diversity, inclusivity, I saw very quickly that those committees only serve the university. They do not serve the marginalized communities. And so what was great about that was that I did meet people who were like-minded. But even within that spirit of meeting people who were like-minded, there was only so far I could go with certain people. So I would say that, okay, if I want to get X accomplished, then I know I can probably talk to this professor, but they're not going to go as far as Y. Therefore, I can tap the shoulder of someone else. So you have to be strategic even in the ways that you want to get things accomplished. And so you use different people for different things. I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean, as far as the relationship will go, the relationship can only go so far, because based on what they've revealed about themselves, that moving forward. So to not spend too much energy trying to think that you can get a particular outcome out of someone who pretty much shows you, their stripes. So committees were another thing that I did. It was difficult for the past couple of years because of COVID. We were not going to universities. Like I like to go there and I like to be in contact with people, but even administrators, a very well-connected administrator knows a lot and has seen a lot and has a lot of institutional memory, and never underestimate who they know and how long they've been there. And they can just pick up the phone and get things done, whereas you will be through email loop after email loop. So to get to know the people within your university, particularly those who've been there a while and are sympathetic to the sort of things that you are passionate about. So I think, that covers it for me.
Great. Megan, did you want to have a last word, or should we move on to the next question?
No, we can keep going. I want to make sure we can get to as many questions as possible.
All right, so we had a comment in the chat from Insil, or rather question. She said, "Hi, Megan. Can you talk more about refugee family/community engagement in your teaching? Sometimes I find it hard to find opportunities to work with community members for various reasons, and I'd like to hear how your experience has been." So Megan, if you could chat about that, and if anyone else has anything they'd want to add, that'd be great too. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't an issue of like, I want to do this research and then I found a community partner. Like I started working with communities just as like a summer job, or volunteering, like different things like that, because I wanted to get involved with these organizations. And then 2 years later, it led to a relationship where they were comfortable with me doing my research with them, right? So I think that that's an important thing, is just like knowing that it takes time, but it also takes that, like, I don't think it's like, which way around to look at it. So I would say just like look for organizations in your community that you're interested in being a part of, and then find ways to be a part of it. That might not be research right away. And that might be a really good thing, actually, on a number of levels and from a number of perspectives. But, reach out to them, see if they're looking for volunteers, see if they like the organization that I found. I got really excited because they did a lot of arts and creativity stuff with the age group I wanted to work with, which was resettled refugee teens. They had a summer camp. They were asking for applications. So I just like made a bookmark, like, let me apply when it's time for their summer camp. And that's why I got involved with them. So yeah, just, I guess that also speaks to the question about like when only research is valued, or when only research and ivory tower teaching are valued, or whatever, that sometimes this volunteer or other type of work can be way undervalued. But if it's something that's important to you, I think that there will be other rewards. And there are a lot of resources too. I will shout out the Coalition for Community Writing, for anyone who's on like the writing side of things. They do a lot of mentorship with graduate students and young like early career researchers on how to communicate doing community-based work to job applications for tenure and promotion review. So that's another resource that I guess I'd throw out there too. I'll put it in the chat.
Great. So, well, if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free. But otherwise, we can move on to Andrew Yim's question. And he asked, for grading assignments, when you were teaching as a graduate student, how long do you spend on providing feedback on a major assignment? If you have 20 to 25 students, would you spend 3 to 5 hours or even more when looking over assignments? So I think this question's a little bit more on feedback. How much time would you dedicate to feedback, things like that?
I would say it depends. Is the assignment connected to another assignment that's similar, and will that feedback be required for that second assignment? It also depends on how your rubric is set up. So one of the things that I learned from UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, is sometimes having a rubric that asks questions facilitates feedback. So, for example, did your assignment have X, Y, and Z? And even though when they become yes and no, it becomes much easier to give feedback, because no, it didn't have it, or yes, it did. So no, if it didn't have it, it's easy to put the feedback in as to what's missing. So there's lots of different ways that you can sort of maximize grading depending on how you're using your rubrics. The other thing is, what did you say here? If you have assignments. Yeah, I guess for me, it would be how that assignment is connected to other things. Oh, and another one is that, so, I mean, I remember when I was a student, I would look just straight at the grade and be like, okay, whatever. I wouldn't look at the feedback, I'll be honest. And I don't think I'm the only student who has done that. So one thing that had happened in another class of mine, and I was like, put that for future use, is that people can resubmit work based on the feedback you gave them. So depending, once again, on how you structure your course, if it's like a writing composition, which is when this is how it was used in my particular case when I was a student, that you have submission 1, you get feedback, and then submission 2, which is the final one, is that you use that feedback for your final and polished submission. So I guess it depends on how that feedback will be used in the course of not just all the assignments, but in your learning objectives for the students. And the second one would be using a strategic rubric. So if it's just something like more like a check-in to make sure they know the positives or the pros and cons of a particular theory, then maybe it's something more straightforward, like a short definition and a yes and no rubric. So yes, they had it, no, they did not have, whatever particular quality you're looking for.
Yeah, just to second what Rhonda was saying, you might also want to think about making space within your course plan for some of those moments. So like you make sure that there's at least 1 hour for you to give feedback to students while they're working in class or something for every single project. And then combining, as Rhonda was saying, different kinds of instruments. Personally, I love to do self-assessment and even checklists with undergrad students so that they are the ones who tell me, here's everything that I've done, here's what I've put in my paper or my project and so on. And then they're not only doing the self-assessment work and reflecting on what they've done, but also that helps you a lot to see and to assess the work that they do.
Yeah, I'll add too that like, it depends on, sort of like what Rhonda was saying, like I usually have like a rough draft due, then a final draft. Rough draft, I give extensive feedback on, that's just my style of teaching. But I try to do the extensive feedback quickly on my end, like maybe no more than, I don't know, I hesitate to give a number, but like 10 minutes per student when I'm teaching 50 students is like a lot. And it feels like a lot once I do the math. So I try to be a little more efficient than that, but that's something I'm learning as I've been teaching more and having more and more students each semester. I'm getting better at that as I go, but at first when I was only teaching 30 students, I could do 10 minutes per student. But when I have 50, it's just not possible. I give hardly any qualitative feedback on final drafts unless it's going into another project. And I also do peer review for all of their major assignments. I aim to give them my feedback on their drafts within like a week. But even then it's like a week that they could be working on feedback from their peers. So at least like when it's due, they have peer feedback, they get immediate feedback, they at least have some stuff they can work on while they wait for me to, catch up on all the 50. And I know 50 is a low number for many people teaching right now. So just adding that, the peer review and the rough drafts are sort of how I work around that too.
Great. Thanks so much for discussing this, everybody. It looks like we only have 8 minutes left. I had a question before that I wanted to circle back to, which was, Rhonda, you mentioned that you use the Pomodoro technique to help you meet deadlines. I was wondering if any of our presenters have examples of other time management tools that you've used and which have been most helpful to you. So I know, Megan, you just mentioned how hard it is when you have 50 students and want to give them extensive feedback. So I don't know if you have any like websites or apps or things like that that have helped you. If so, if you could share them with us, that'd be great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I mean, so I identify as neurodivergent and disabled, and so time and time management and like what works for me is just very different than it might be for someone who's neurotypical or non-disabled. And so for me, the way that these identities manifest is that the energy and focus that I have for things is very varied and can be sometimes unpredictable. I don't know always. That's why I'm writing emails at 8 p.m. on Saturdays sometimes, because 2 p.m. on Monday, guess what? That wasn't it. That wasn't when it was. So I just want to name that too, that sometimes what I've encountered is that there's a lot of like talk of like different tools and resources, and I think these are really great and everyone should try them out. Like the Pomodoro technique's amazing. And especially for those of us who are like not neurotypical, like just know that not all these things are going to work for us. And I think that's also okay. So find what works for you. And what works for me is I like in my notes app on my computer and my phone, I like make a checklist of I have like deadlines of what I need to do under like to schedule. And then I like plan out my week with all my meetings based on my calendar. I have to have a really robust digital calendar. Otherwise I won't remember that I'm having it. So my calendar is my first tool that I use, which is just the built-in calendar on like my Mac and iPhone, like nothing fancy. And then I like put all my time-bound commitments, things that I have to do at a certain time in my to-do list. And then I like day by day sort of fill in the other stuff and like kind of backwards plan. And so that's why I was saying before, it's like a very chaotic in some ways, but also very, it seems rigid. But the thing about it is, because it's me, is that let's say like, yeah, I say, okay, I was gonna, grade on Thursday, but my health doesn't allow me to. Okay, then I just move that stuff to Friday. Like, I'm very flexible with myself. It seems very rigid, but I'm like, well, what can I move? When can I move? What can I had an extra period of hyper focus. Like, what can I add today that I can like get a jump start on, So it's not any one way, but I just wanted to name that too, just from a like kind of disability perspective, that we're all different. So finding what works for us is a lifelong journey, but
Great. Okay. And then we had one more final question from Arsandi Fnu. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. They asked, some teaching opportunities are not always available in our department. For example, you're teaching a course of research in a department while you're attending another department. How do you see this? How do you deal with two different atmospheres? So if you have experience maybe teaching in one department or one school when you're a student in another department or school, if you could talk about that, that'd be great. Thanks so much.
Is there something specific that you are concerned about? Like because I'm a little stuck on the answer, but maybe the other two presenters, because I attend one university and I've taught at another, and it's within the same province and within the same bachelor program. So there's familiarity in terms of curricular requirements. So I don't feel too much stress in terms of them having sort of a different institutional vibe, but I'm wondering if there's something in particular the presenter was curious about. But maybe Cristina and Megan, they want to say something.
Yeah, I can talk about how I took up that question. And I was imagining, I work with students mostly in the Mateso program in the English department, but also students from other world language classes, so like Spanish, Japanese, and things like that, right? And it's very interesting to think about their pedagogy, depending on the traditions behind language teaching in relation to those languages, right? So sometimes I notice those differences, and maybe this is what the person was asking about, but I'm not sure. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And so it's interesting for students to see the different dynamics happening depending on what language they teach and what scholarship they're learning, right? So I think Megan earlier mentioned that what she does is to find holes and think about how to bring in her approach and push for criticality, because I know that that's what she does, in those little ways here and there, right? Despite these contradictions or despite these different approaches to language teaching in those contexts. I don't know if that's what the person meant, but that's how I understood the question.
I'll just say quickly, it can also be nice being in different contexts, because then you have different influences, different voices, different perspectives that can help you grow as a teacher and a researcher. So I'll just add that.
Great. Well, thank you all for closing up with all of these great responses to the Q&A. And now I'm going to turn it over to John to conclude.
Yeah, thanks everybody. That was very insightful. I hope everybody had a great time. Everybody had an insightful time. But before leaving, we invite you to please take a minute to complete this webinar evaluation form that Insil has dropped in the chat, but you can also scan the QR code on your screens. Your responses are very important for us to help us strengthen our future events. And I think that's it from the AAAL Graduate Student Counts. So today, thank you for joining us today. Have a great night. See you next year. Happy holidays and have a restful winter break.